What if I told you that right now, in this exact moment, before you change a single thing about yourself, before you solve a single problem, before you become anyone different than who you already are, you are already carrying within you something so vast, so luminous, so unbreakably whole, that every philosopher who ever lived spent their entire life trying to describe it, and none of them fully succeeded. What if the peace you have been searching for was never lost? What if it has been waiting here, in the quiet beneath your breath, patient as stone, steady as the stars that burn above the clouds whether you can see them or not? Tonight, we are not going on a journey to find something. We are going on a journey to remember something, and that makes all the difference. Welcome, you are here, and that is already enough. Tonight we will walk together through an ancient landscape, through the gardens of Buddhist wisdom, across the stony ground of Stoic philosophy, along the winding rivers of Taoism, through the candlelit corridors of Sufi mysticism, and into the deep forests where shamanic fire still burns at the edge of the known world. We will pause at the hearths of Anatolian sages and Persian poets. We will sit for a moment with the Japanese masters who found beauty in broken things. This is not a lecture. This is not a test. There is nothing you must remember, nothing you must get right, no destination you must reach. These teachings have been carried across thousands of years, passed from one human heart to another like a flame passed between candles. They have survived wars and empires and the rise and fall of civilizations because they speak to something in us that does not change. Something that was true when Marcus Aurelius wrote by lamplight in a Roman camp. Something that was true when Rumi wept in the streets of Konya. Something that was true when Lao Tzu walked into the western wilderness and disappeared into silence. Something that is still true tonight, in this quiet moment, wherever you are. Let your body soften now. Feel whatever surface holds you, its solidity, its support. Let your shoulders release. Let your jaw unclench. Let the breath happen on its own, because it knows what to do even when you forget to ask. You have been carrying much. You are allowed to set it down here. Simply listen. Let these stories and teachings fall into you the way rain falls into dry earth, without force, without hurry, finding their own way down to where the roots are. The oldest word for wisdom in many traditions means something like this: paying attention to what is actually here. That is all we are doing tonight. Paying attention. Together, let us begin. Section 1. The river that does not fight the stone on the nature of resistance. Sound. Slow water moving over rocks, barely audible beneath the music. There is a question that has troubled human hearts since the first person looked at the stars and wondered why suffering exists. It is a question that has been asked in Sanskrit and Arabic and Greek and Japanese and in every language that has ever tried to wrap words around the mystery of being alive. And the question is simply this: why does fighting make it worse? You know this pattern. You have lived it. We all have. A thought arrives that you do not want. A worry, a fear, something unresolved from the day or the year or a decade ago, and you try to push it away. You tell yourself, stop thinking about this. This is not helpful. Just let it go. And the thought, as if it heard the command and decided to be contrary, returns stronger than before, plants itself more firmly. It grows roots, or a difficult emotion rises in your chest. Anger or grief, or that particular loneliness that has no name, and you tighten against it. You say to yourself, I should not feel this way. I am stronger than this. I need to move on. And the emotion, rather than retreating, burns hotter. It does not leave. It does not fade. It waits. Or there is a person in your life who troubles you. Someone whose behavior is difficult, whose presence creates friction, whose words catch against you like a rough edge catches against cloth. You try to avoid them. You try to manage them. You try to meet their sharpness with your own. And nothing improves. Everything hardens. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who governed the most powerful empire on earth while also writing, in private, one of the most tender and searching journals in human history, understood this pattern with extraordinary clarity. He wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Read those words again slowly. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He was not speaking poetically. He was speaking practically, from the raw experience of a man who faced constant opposition. Military, political, personal. and who had learned that the obstacle was not separate from the path. The obstacle was the path. Lao Tzu, who lived in China perhaps 5 centuries before Aurelius, wrote this in the Tao Te Ching. Nothing in the world is softer or more yielding than water, yet nothing is better at overcoming the hard and the strong. He watched water for years, the way it does not fight the stone but finds around it, finds through it, finds beneath it. The stone does not change, but the stone is eventually undone. Not by force, by patience, by the simple willingness to keep moving without insisting on a particular path. Between these two wisdom traditions, the Stoic West and the Taoist East, there is a meeting point, a place where the soldier and the sage shake hands across centuries. And that meeting point is this: resistance is not strength. Yielding is not weakness. The river does not lose itself by flowing around the stone. It remains exactly what it is, water moving free. In the Sufi tradition, the poets spoke of the desert and the wind. Rumi, whose heart was broken open by the loss of his beloved teacher Shams, wrote endlessly about the reed flute. The instrument cut from its reed bed, crying because of its separation, and through that very crying, making music. The cry is the music. The wound is the instrument. The thing that seems like loss is also the source of the song. The Sufi masters taught something they called fana, a dissolution of the ego, the rigid self that clings and resists and insists. Not destruction of the self, but the softening of its hard edges. The reed must be hollow to sing. The cup must be empty to receive. The heart must be open, must have been broken open, to hold anything worth holding. Epictetus, who was born a slave and became one of the greatest philosophers in Western history, spent his entire life teaching from the insight he had earned the hard way. There are things within our control and things that are not. He called this the dichotomy of control, and he returned to it in every teaching, every conversation, every page of the discourses that his students wrote down as he spoke. What is within our control? Our thoughts, our choices, our responses, the quality of attention we bring to each moment. What is not within our control? Everything else. The weather, other people's behavior, outcomes, the world. This sounds simple. It is not simple. It is perhaps the hardest and most liberating truth a human being can learn to live. Because most of our suffering, Epictetus would say, all of our suffering, comes from confusing these two categories. From treating things outside our control as though they should respond to our will. From demanding that the stone move because we want it to. From exhausting ourselves in wars we were never meant to win. Tonight, as we begin this journey together, I want to offer you an image to carry. Imagine a great throne room in a palace. Not a specific palace, but one from the landscape of the imagination, the kind of place that appears in dreams. Tall stone columns. High windows where light falls in long golden shafts. Ancient tapestries on the walls showing generations of the wise and the strong. A throne at the center, carved wood and worn silk, carrying the weight of many years. Now imagine that something uninvited has entered this palace. Not through the front gates, it was never announced. It simply appeared the way difficulties always do, not at convenient times, not with proper warning, but suddenly, in the middle of an ordinary day, when the ruler was away and the household was unprepared. Something dark, something that smells wrong, something that sits down on the throne with a calm that feels like arrogance, as if it has every right to be there. The guards are summoned, the ministers are called. Everyone agrees. This thing must go. And so begins the battle. And the creature, for that is what it is, a creature of the kind that ancient stories call a demon, though we might call it by other names. Anxiety, resentment, grief, the weight of unfinished business, the echo of old wounds, this creature does something unexpected. It grows. Every harsh word feeds it. Every threat makes it larger. Every attempt to force it out gives it more substance, more solidity, more presence in the room. By the time the household has exhausted itself in fury and fear, the creature fills nearly half the throne room. It has grown so large that its form presses against the ancient columns. Its breath fogs the high windows. This is not a fantasy. This is a description of the interior life of almost every human being who has ever tried to defeat a difficulty through force alone. The Anatolian mystics had a saying, "Every wall you build around fire warms fire." Every wall you build around water drowns fire. The question is not whether to respond to difficulty. The question is what you bring to the response. Anger fed with anger becomes rage. Fear met with panic becomes terror. Grief resisted becomes a stone in the chest that weighs down every breath for years. But then, in our story, in the ancient teaching this story carries, the wise ruler returns. And everything changes. Not through force. Not through commands. Not through any of the weapons the household has already tried and found wanting. The ruler enters the throne room, takes in the scene with clear eyes, and then does something so simple that the entire assembled household freezes in astonishment. The ruler smiles. Not a smile of denial, not a smile of madness, not the terrible smile of someone who does not understand what they are seeing. A smile of understanding. A smile that says, I see you. I know what you are, and I am not afraid. Then the words, welcome, dear visitor. Dogen Zenji, the 13th century Japanese master who founded the Soto school of Zen and wrote some of the most luminous prose in the history of human thought, describes something similar in his teaching on Shoshin, or beginner's mind. He wrote that in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few. The ruler approaches the demon not as someone who knows how to defeat it, but as someone who is willing to meet it fresh, without the accumulated hatred and fear that had fed it so well. Welcome. Thank you for coming. And the creature begins to shrink. This is the teaching at the heart of so much ancient wisdom, from the Buddha's declaration that hatred is never ended by hatred, but only by love, to the Stoic recognition that our responses are the only territory we truly govern, to the Sufi understanding that the heart which is open cannot be broken the same way a closed heart can, to the Taoist image of water wearing away stone not through violence but through patient, yielding presence. Seneca, writing from Rome in the 1st century, said it plainly, Dum differtur vita transcurrit. While we are postponing, life passes. And in the context of inner conflict, we might hear it this way. While we are fighting what has already arrived, we are missing the only moment we actually have, this one. The creature in the throne room shrank not because it was defeated, but because it was seen. Not because it was expelled, but because it was included. Not because anyone pretended it was not terrible, but because the quality of the welcome, genuine, warm, without fear, starved it of the only food it could consume, hostility. There is something profound in this for the night ahead. Whatever difficulty sits on the throne of your mind tonight, whatever creature has taken up residence in the chambers of your heart while you were away, doing other things, living your life, you do not have to fight it. You can walk toward it. You can offer it tea. You can say, I see you. I am not afraid. You are welcome here because this is my heart, and I have decided that my heart will not be a place of war. The Japanese concept of wabi-sabi, the finding of beauty in imperfection, in incompleteness, in the worn and the weathered and the broken, applies not only to pottery and architecture but to the interior life. The cracked wall of the throne room, the worn silk of the ancient throne, the imperfect guest who has arrived uninvited. All of this is part of the beauty of a life actually lived. None of it needs to be hidden. None of it needs to be destroyed. It needs only to be met with the quality of welcome that transforms everything it touches. Welcome, dear visitor. You must be tired from your journey. And in the space that opens after that welcome, something remarkable becomes possible. Peace. Not the peace of a battlefield after the enemy has been driven out. Not the quiet of suppression or denial, but the peace of a room where the fighting has stopped because one person was wise enough and brave enough to set down the sword first. Let that peace settle into you now. Feel it in your shoulders. Feel it in your jaw. Feel it in the long, slow deepening of the breath. You are the wise ruler. This is your palace. And you can choose at any moment in any difficulty how you meet what arrives. Pause. Music fades slightly. Breathing space. Section 2. The unwanted guest, a story from the edge of the known world. Sound. Wind across a desert, faint, ancient. A fire crackling softly beneath the music. Let me tell you a story. Not the story exactly as it has been told before, though it carries the same ancient bones, but the story as it might have been told in a caravanserai at the edge of the Persian desert, where travelers, came in from the long silence of the road and sat around a fire and shared what they carried, which was never only goods, but always also wisdom, gathered piece by piece across the distances they had traveled. Once, in a kingdom at the place where the mountains met the desert, that particular geography that has always seemed to stand at the boundary between the known and the unknown, there was a palace known throughout the land for the quality of its peace. The peace was not accident. It was practice. The ruler of this kingdom had spent many years learning from teachers of many traditions, from the teachers of the East who spoke of the emptiness that is not absence but presence, from the teachers of the West who spoke of virtue and the governance of the inner life, from the desert mystics who said that the heart is a mirror and must be kept clean if it is to reflect the light of the divine, from the shamans of the northern forests who said that the spirit of a person is as vast as the sky, and only forgets its vastness when it looks too long at the ground. This ruler had learned something that cannot be learned from books alone, only from years of living and watching and falling and rising again. That the quality of peace does not depend on the absence of difficulty. It depends on the quality of your relationship to difficulty. The day the uninvited visitor arrived, the ruler was away, as rulers must sometimes be, attending to the business of the world beyond the palace walls. The household was good, well-intentioned, full of capable and caring people. But they had not yet learned what the ruler had learned. When the creature appeared in the outer halls, small at first, barely the size of a child, but carrying with it a coldness that seemed to lower the temperature of every room it entered, the reaction was immediate. Instinctive, human, get it out. This is worth pausing to honor because the instinct is not wrong. It comes from love. It comes from the desire to protect what is beautiful, to defend what is sacred, to keep the palace. The inner palace, the palace of the heart, free from intrusion. Bodhidharma, the fierce-eyed teacher who carried Zen from India to China and is said to have sat facing a cave wall for 9 years in unbroken meditation, spoke about this kind of defense, not as something to be condemned, but as something to be understood. We build walls because we have been hurt. We defend because we have known attack. The soldiers in the throne room were not bad people. They were simply people who had not yet discovered that their weapons were feeding the very thing they feared. Each angry word, the creature grew. Each command, larger. Each threat, each drawn sword, each escalation of force, larger still. The Sufi poets described the ego, the nafs, the constructed self that clings and defends and insists on its own primacy, as a fire that feeds on attention. Feed it anger and it burns hotter. Starve it of fuel and it dims. This is not metaphor alone. It is practical psychology, discovered centuries before psychology had a name, tested in the laboratories of the human heart across generations of contemplative practice. By the time the ruler returned, the creature had grown enormous. The throne room, that inner space where the sovereign faculty of wisdom should sit, where clarity should govern, where the deep knowing should rest on its ancient seat, had been invaded not just by the creature but by the atmosphere the creature required. Fear, hatred, exhaustion, the particular despair that comes from having tried everything you know and watched everything fail. The ruler stood at the threshold of the throne room and looked. In the Sufi tradition, there is an image called the kalb, the heart, but not the physical organ, rather the spiritual faculty that perceives truth directly, the place where the divine light falls like sunlight into a room. The mystics said that this faculty, when cleaned of its accumulated dust of ego and fear and habit, becomes a mirror. And what does a mirror do? It reflects. It shows things as they are, without distortion, without the warping lens of desire or aversion. The ruler's heart, in that moment at the threshold, was a mirror. What the mirror showed was this: a creature, yes, frightening, yes, enormous, yes, but also a creature that had fed on every act of hostility it had been offered. A creature that was made, quite literally, from the energy of resistance. A creature that could only grow in the soil of hatred and could not survive a single genuine act of welcome. And so the words came naturally, not as a technique, not as a strategy, as the simple truth of what the mirror showed. Welcome, dear visitor. I am sorry I was not here to greet you when you arrived. You must have been waiting a long time. In the Japanese aesthetic of wabi-sabi, there is a practice called kintsugi, the repair of broken pottery with gold. so that the breaks become the most beautiful part of the object rather than its flaw. The cracks are not hidden. They are honored. They are filled with light. The wise ruler was practicing a kind of kintsugi on the atmosphere of the throne room. The cracks, the fear, the exhaustion, the accumulated hostility were not being denied. They were being filled with something better. Not hidden, transformed. You must be tired. Please make yourself comfortable. Is there anything I can offer you? Some water, perhaps? The creature shrank. And here is the moment in the story that carries the deepest teaching. It was not only the ruler's words that worked the transformation. It was what happened next, as the others in the room, one by one, took their cue from the ruler and began to lay down their weapons. One minister found courage and offered tea. A servant came forward with blankets. Another spoke words of genuine welcome, not because they had fully understood, not because the fear was gone, but because the ruler's example had shown them another possible response. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal the meditations which he never intended for publication, which were written for himself alone in the long nights of a military campaign. These words: the first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are. An untroubled spirit, not an absence of awareness, not denial or ignorance, but a stillness at the center that is not disturbed by what arrives at the edges. The ruler had this, and in having it gave it to the room. The creature grew smaller with every act of genuine welcome. The terrible smell that had filled the throne room began to fade. The coldness in the air became warmth. And finally, as the last acts of kindness were offered, as the last words of welcome were spoken, the creature gave something like a sigh, and quietly, without drama, faded into the air, gone. The throne room was peaceful once more, and the household sat for a long time in that peace, not quite able to explain what had happened, but knowing, in the way that the body knows things the mind cannot yet articulate, that something important had occurred, something that would not easily be forgotten. Lao Tzu wrote, "Knowing others is wisdom. Knowing yourself is enlightenment." The ruler knew the creature because the ruler knew the self, knew what feeds hostility and what starves it, knew that the only way out of the war was to stop fighting. Epictetus would recognize this. Rumi would recognize this. Dogen would bow to this. And tonight, lying in the quiet of wherever you are, listening to these words, you recognize it too, because you have always known it. The welcome has always been available to you. The kindness has always been there, waiting in the place beneath the fear, beneath the habit of battle, beneath the old learned belief that you must fight to survive. You do not always have to fight. Sometimes, often, even you can simply open the door and say, "Come in, sit down. You are not my enemy. You are my guest." And guests, in every culture that has ever understood anything about what it means to be human, are sacred. Long pause. Music rises and falls like breath. Section 3. The sacred teachers we never chose. There is an old Sufi teaching that says the beloved sometimes appears as the thorn. Sit with that image for a moment. The thorn, the thing that pierces us, the thing we pull from our skin with a hiss of pain and throw away, the thing we curse when we reach into the rose bush without looking. The thorn, the beloved sometimes appears as the thorn, not despite the pain, through it, because of it. The thorn is the beloved wearing an unfamiliar face, carrying an unfamiliar form, bringing gifts we did not ask for and would not have chosen, in packages we do not immediately recognize as gifts at all. This is among the most difficult of all the difficult teachings, and it is also among the truest. Dogen Zenji, writing in 13th century Japan, described a practice he called shikantaza, simply sitting, total presence, nothing added, nothing subtracted. He wrote that mountains are always walking, that water is neither permanent nor impermanent, that the entire universe is your true body. These are not riddles designed to confuse. They are descriptions of what happens when you look very closely at reality without the filter of your preferences and your fears. When you look very closely, without preference or fear, at the difficult people in your life, the ones who test your patience, who seem placed in your path by some cruel and arbitrary force, you begin to see something Dogen would recognize. They are walking mountains. They are carrying something vast and ancient. Their difficulty is not directed at you personally, even when it feels intensely personal. They are simply moving through the world in the only way they know how to move, shaped by forces that preceded you, burdened with weights you cannot see, finding their way through a terrain that is as confusing and painful for them as any terrain is for any traveler who has lost their map. And yet, they are in your path. They rub against you. They catch on the rough edges of your patience like cloth catching on a splinter. And because they do this, consistently, repeatedly, almost artistically, they are giving you something no comfortable companion can provide. They are showing you where you are still rough. In the Japanese wabi-sabi tradition, the beauty of an object comes from its history, the crack in the bowl that was repaired with gold, the unevenness of a surface shaped by hand rather than machine, the way age leaves its mark on wood and fabric and pottery. Perfection is not the goal. Authenticity is the mark of use, the evidence of a life actually lived. Our rough places, our places of reactivity, our sharp edges, our points of habitual defensiveness, are not flaws to be eliminated. They are places where work is still happening. Places where, if we are willing to pay attention, genuine transformation is possible. Bodhidharma, who is depicted in Chinese and Japanese art as a wild-eyed, bearded figure of terrifying intensity, is said to have told the Chinese emperor, when the emperor asked how much merit he had accumulated through his vast sponsorship of Buddhist temples and monasteries, "Vast emptiness, nothing holy." The emperor, who had expected praise, was unsettled. He asked, "Who is it that stands before me?" Bodhidharma replied, "I don't know. This story has been interpreted in many ways, but one reading is relevant here." Bodhidharma refused to give the emperor comfort. He refused to offer the reassurance the emperor sought. He was, in the deepest sense, a difficult presence. A thorn, a teacher wearing an unfamiliar face. And the emperor, had he been ready to receive what Bodhidharma was offering, might have learned something that all his temples and monasteries, all his merit and his power, had not yet taught him, that the treasure he was seeking could not be purchased, could not be accumulated, could not be built from the outside in. It had to be found in the place Bodhidharma knew and the emperor had not yet visited, the still, empty, luminous depths of his own awareness. Now let us visit a mountain monastery. Imagine it in the way the old stories ask us to imagine things, not as a specific place with specific details, but as the essence of such a place. Stone buildings, simple rooms, the sound of a bell marking the hours, the smell of incense and clean mountain air, gardens where things are growing and being tended with great care. A young practitioner has come here from the city. She left behind a complicated life. Good things in it, difficult things too, the ordinary mixture, because something in her recognized that she needed to go deeper, needed to find what was underneath the noise, needed, as she might have said, to learn to be still. She had read the ancient texts. She had practiced in small ways on her own, in the stolen quiet of early mornings. She had tasted something, a glimpse of the stillness she was seeking, and it had made her hunger for more. The monastery, she thought, would be where she found it. It was, instead, where she found a particularly challenging fellow practitioner. This person, who had been at the monastery for many years and carried the casual authority of long residence, had habits that grated on the young woman like sandpaper on bare skin. They talked too loudly in the meditation hall. They offered advice nobody had requested, about everything from the angle of the sitting posture to the proper way to wash a bowl. They had opinions, voluminous, freely expressed opinions, on every matter, delivered with a cheerful certainty that somehow made them more irritating rather than less. Worst of all, this person seemed genuinely happy, unaware of any problem, serenely oblivious to the effect they had on others, which was, from the young woman's perspective, something close to unbearable. Marcus Aurelius, who governed an empire and had access to irritants far more consequential than a talkative monastery resident, wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are this way because they cannot tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. This is not a counsel of despair. It is a preparation for compassion. The young woman, after months of growing bitterness, finally went to one of the elder teachers. She prepared her speech carefully. She laid out her case with precision and what she believed was complete reasonableness. Surely the teacher would see. Surely some gentle redirection of the offending practitioner would follow. The elder listened to everything without interruption. When the young woman finished, there was a long silence, the kind of silence that Zen teachers use deliberately, because silence often teaches more efficiently than words. Then the elder smiled, not unkindly, not dismissively, but with the particular warmth of someone who recognizes a student standing at the exact threshold of their next lesson. "What a blessing," the elder said, "to have such a teacher living among us." The young woman felt resistance rise in her chest like a tide. This was not what she had come to hear, but the elder continued, "You came here to learn patience. Where did you expect to learn it? You came to develop compassion. How will compassion grow if you only practice it with people you already find easy to love?" Epictetus said, "Seek not the good in external things. Seek it in yourself." The young woman had been seeking the good peace, stillness, spiritual growth, in the external arrangement of the monastery, in the removal of the difficult element, in the perfection of the environment. But the environment was already perfect. Not perfect in the sense of comfortable or frictionless. Perfect in the sense of precisely right for the next stage of her learning. The difficult practitioner was not an obstacle to her practice. The difficult practitioner was her practice. In the Anatolian Irfan tradition, the deep wisdom current that runs through Turkish mystical thought, carrying elements of Sufi, Central Asian shamanic, and pre-Islamic knowing, there is a concept sometimes described as Sobit, sacred conversation. It is the meeting between souls that catalyzes growth. And the teachers in this tradition were emphatic. Sobit does not always feel pleasant. The most transformative meetings are often the most uncomfortable. The soul that rubs against yours and reveals your rough places is doing you more genuine service than the soul that smooths your already smooth surfaces. The young woman returned to her practice. She did something that was, for her, profoundly difficult. She began to include the troubling fellow practitioner in her loving-kindness meditation. She would sit, settle her breath, and deliberately bring this person to mind. Not with gritted teeth and determined effort, but as gently as she could manage, and offer the ancient phrases, "May you be happy, may you be at peace, may you be free from suffering." At first, something in her laughed at the exercise. The mind generated objections. The heart produced what felt less like warmth than like a particularly noble form of endurance. But she stayed with it, day after day, week after week, and something slowly, the way the first light of dawn appears not as a single moment but as a gradual softening of the darkness. Something began to change. She began to see this person differently. Beneath the loud voice and the unsolicited advice, she began to perceive something she had completely missed: loneliness. A hunger for connection expressing itself in the only way this person had found, however clumsy, however unconsciously alienating. She saw someone reaching, in their limited way, for the same thing she was reaching for. Someone who had not found the path to stillness, yes, but who was also, in their own manner, looking. Plato, in his dialogues, described the movement of the soul toward the good as a kind of turning, not the acquisition of new vision, but the redirection of a vision that was always already there. We do not learn to see. We learn to look in a different direction. The young woman's vision was turning. She did not suddenly enjoy the loud voice. She did not begin to welcome the unrequested advice. But she began to see a human being. And in seeing a human being, flawed, struggling, seeking, alive, she found something unexpected. Not only compassion for this person, but compassion for herself. For she too had rough places. She too had ways of being that were less than skillful. She too was a work in progress, a bowl with cracks, a surface bearing the marks of incompletion. And those cracks were not evidence of failure. In the wabi-sabi understanding, they were the most beautiful part. Dogen wrote, "To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things." The young woman had come to the monastery to study herself. She had found, through the friction of this unwanted teacher, that she was still very much present. all her sharp edges, all her preferences, all her demands on the world. And in that finding was the beginning of forgetting, of releasing the tight grip of self-definition, of allowing the identity to become a little more porous, a little more open, a little more willing to be shaped by life rather than insisting on shaping it. The rocks in the river polish each other. No stone polishes itself. The difficult people in our lives are the river. We are the stone. And the beauty that emerges from the process, the smoothness, the luminosity, the capacity to catch and reflect light, that is the gift. You may, tonight, be able to think of someone who has been your difficult teacher. Someone who has rubbed against you with particular consistency. Someone whose name you perhaps said with a particular tone, whose image in your mind produces a particular tightening. What if you sat, just for a moment, with the question, what have I learned from this friction that I could not have learned any other way? You do not have to love the thorn. You do not have to pretend it does not hurt. But you can honor what the thorn has taught you. You can bow to the teacher, however unwanted, who made you more spacious, more patient, more genuinely compassionate than comfort ever could have. Section 4. The mirror of the heart, seeing the light in every darkness. The Sufi mystics spoke of the heart as a mirror, not a mirror that is given to us already polished, a mirror that must be cleaned, that accumulates the dust of experience, the dust of fear and habit and old wounds and the accumulated grime of years of looking at the world through the narrow lens of our own pain. And that must be wiped clean, again and again, through the practice of presence and attention and love. When the mirror is clean, it does not see what it wants to see. It does not project. It does not distort. It simply reflects the light that is actually there. And the light, the Sufis were consistent on this point, is always there. In every person, in every situation, in every moment, no matter how dark it appears. The light does not leave. The mirror becomes dirty. The eye becomes clouded. But the light, what the Islamic tradition calls nur, what the Buddhist tradition calls Buddha nature, what Plato called the form of the good, what the shamanic traditions know as the luminosity that lives in all things, the light does not go away. This section is about the art of finding it. There is a hospital in a city where the ordinary human drama plays out in concentrated form. People arrive there carrying the most difficult things a person can carry. Conditions of the mind, troubles of the spirit, the places where the inner world has broken in ways that are not visible from the outside but are felt from the inside with a relentlessness that can become unbearable. The healers in this place. Doctors, nurses, caregivers, all the quiet workers who move through corridors carrying other people's pain with as much grace as they can manage, had been doing their best for a long time. And their best was genuinely good, knowledgeable, caring, thorough. But something was missing. In the Platonic tradition, Plato, who wrote his dialogues in Athens more than 2,000 years ago, who preserved and extended the teaching of Socrates, who understood that philosophy was not an academic exercise but a practice for the soul, there is a concept of anamnesis, of remembering. The idea that learning is not the acquisition of new information but the recovery of what was always already known, buried beneath the accumulated forgettings of ordinary life. The healers in this hospital were about to remember something. A new approach was proposed. Simple, almost embarrassingly simple. Instead of focusing primarily on what was broken, they would begin to focus on what was whole. Instead of directing most of their attention to the storms, the crises, the difficult episodes, the symptoms and struggles, they would begin to pay attention to the clearings, the moments between storms, the intervals of peace, the times when the person in their care was not suffering but resting or laughing or connecting or showing some quality that was good and alive and real. They would notice the light, and more than notice it, they would name it. They would help the people in their care see it in themselves. Aristotle, who was Plato's student and one of the most systematically curious minds in human history, wrote about eudaimonia, which is often translated as happiness but means something closer to human flourishing, to the full expression of the human capacity for goodness and wisdom and virtue. He argued that eudaimonia was not a feeling to be pursued but a practice to be cultivated, a way of living that brought out the best in the person consistently over time. The healers, without knowing it, were practicing an Aristotelian medicine. What happened was extraordinary. As the healers shifted their attention toward moments of wellness, toward the times when the people in their care were clear and connected and whole, those moments began to expand. Not because the difficulty disappeared, not because the storms never came again, but because what we attend to grows, because the attention of another person, directed at your wholeness, is one of the most powerful medicines that exists. The people in this hospital began to believe, perhaps for the first time in a long time, that they were more than their difficulties, that the storms did not constitute the whole of who they were, that the light was real, even when the storm made it hard to see. Socrates, who spent his entire life walking the streets of Athens asking questions, said that the unexamined life is not worth living. But he said something else too, something that receives less attention, that the examined life is worth living precisely because examination, done with honesty and love, reveals something worth discovering, the good that is already present in the soul, obscured by confusion and habit but never absent, never lost. This is what the healers were doing. They were helping people examine their lives and find the good that was already there. Now, consider the difficult person in your own life. You have lived with your perception of this person for some time. You have a story about them, well-developed, carefully maintained, supported by evidence gathered over months or years of experience. The story is probably accurate as far as it goes. The difficulties you have observed are real. The frustrations are real. But the story, accurate as it is, may be incomplete. Because every human being is more than their story. Every human being carries within them qualities that are good, qualities that may be hidden, rarely expressed, buried under layers of defense and habit, but present. Present the way roots are present beneath concrete. Invisible but alive, waiting for a crack in the surface through which to grow. The Islamic tradition speaks of the fitra, the original nature, the innate goodness with which every human being is born, before the accumulation of conditioning and wound and habit obscures it. This original nature does not disappear, cannot be destroyed. It can be buried very deep, covered over by so many layers that its warmth can no longer be felt from the outside. But it is there. The Sufi image for this is the candle behind thick curtains. You cannot see the flame. You cannot feel its warmth. But it is burning. It was never extinguished. The practice is to part the curtains. Socrates, Plato would have us remember, did not teach by telling people what to think. He taught by asking questions that helped people think for themselves, that helped them find, through their own searching, the truth that was already present in them. The wisdom was not imported from outside. It was drawn out from within. This is what seeing the light in others actually does. When we look for the good in someone, genuinely look, not as a technique but as a sincere act of attention, we do something more than change our own perception. We create conditions in which the person themselves becomes more able to access their own goodness. They feel seen, not defined by their worst moments, not reduced to their most difficult qualities, seen in their fullness. And there is nothing more healing than being fully seen. The Persian poet Hafiz, who lived in 14th century Shiraz and is considered one of the greatest lyric poets in any language, wrote endlessly about the divine beloved, the quality of love that sees through all surfaces to the light beneath. He wrote about the tavern of the heart where all the pretensions of the ego are set aside, where the wine of recognition is shared, where the soul is known for what it truly is, not for its accomplishments or its failures, but for the light it carries. The Anatolian tradition carries this same understanding. The dervishes who danced in the presence of Rumi were not performing. They were remembering. The turning of the whirling dervish is an act of remembering the original motion of the cosmos, the turning of stars and planets, the rotation of atoms, the movement of life around its center. And the center, always the center, is stillness, is light. When we look at a difficult person and find the light, however small, however obscured, we are doing a version of what the dervish does. We are turning our attention toward the center, rather than the surface. We are choosing to see what is essentially true rather than what is temporarily difficult. This does not require pretending the difficulty does not exist. The curtain is real. The obstacle is real. But the candle behind it is also real. And here is the practical truth that underlies all of this philosophy and mysticism and ancient wisdom. We tend to get more of what we pay attention to. This is not mystical. It is pragmatic. When we focus on the difficulty in a person, they sense it, often without knowing exactly what they are sensing, and they become more defended, more guarded, more likely to express exactly the difficult qualities we have been focusing on. Our attention calls forth a response. But when we look for the light, when we genuinely find something real and good in this person and orient our attention toward it, they sense that too. They relax slightly in the warmth of being seen as something more than their problem. They become, if only a little, more able to access the parts of themselves that are not difficult. This is how the demon in the throne room shrinks under welcome. Not magic, not technique. The natural response of the human heart to being met with genuine kindness rather than hostility. Marcus Aurelius, who dealt with people he genuinely found difficult, senators, generals, family members, the full human spectrum, wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth by which no one was ever truly harmed." It is the person who continues in his self-deception and ignorance who is harmed. He was speaking of himself. But the same humility that opened him to truth in his own errors opened him to perceiving truth in others, even in those he found least congenial. Tonight, before you sleep, you might try a small practice. Think of someone who has been difficult for you. Now, without dismissing the difficulty, without pretending it does not exist, ask yourself, what might be good in this person? What might they be doing well in some area of their life? What might they be carrying that you cannot see? What might lie beneath the surface of their difficult behavior? You do not need to share these reflections. This is an interior practice, a quiet turning of the mirror's face. But notice what happens as you do it. Notice whether something in your own chest softens. Notice whether the difficulty, still real, becomes somehow smaller in relation to the fuller picture you are now holding. This is the cleaning of the mirror. This is the practice that the Sufi masters called purification of the heart. Not a dramatic event, but a daily practice. A daily choice to wipe away a little more of the accumulated dust, to allow a little more light to pass through. Section 5. The long road of patience, tea offered to a stone. Seneca wrote in one of his letters, the Epistolae Moralis, written to his friend Lucilius in the final years of his life, when he knew that time was short. He wrote, "Recede in te ipsi quantum potes." Retire into yourself as much as you can. But then he wrote something that complicates this counsel of interiority beautifully. Cum his verserca te meliorem acturi sunt. Associate with those who are likely to improve you. The tension here is productive. We go inward to find our foundation. We go outward to be tested and shaped. Neither alone is sufficient. The inner life without the outer friction becomes soft. The outer engagement without the inner rootedness becomes reactive. True patience, the deep patience the ancient teachers speak of, the patience that is not merely the absence of impatience but an active quality of the soul. True patience is not built in comfortable conditions. It is built in exactly the conditions we would most prefer to avoid. Let me tell you about a man who served tea. He lived in a place of confinement, not a monastery, though some of what he experienced there echoes the monastery story. A place of authority and restriction, where certain people had power and others did not, and the distance between them was maintained with the kind of consistency that makes it seem natural even when it is not. The chief of this place was a man who had constructed himself, over many years, into something that resembled stone more than flesh. He did not greet those in his care. He did not acknowledge their presence as human presence. He moved through the facility like weather, impersonal, unavoidable, leaving cold in his wake. The man who served tea had learned not to expect warmth from this direction. He had learned, as one learns in such places, to keep his expectations small and his guard present. He had developed the particular economy of spirit that difficult circumstances require. Give little, expect nothing, survive. Then he met a teacher. The teacher was not remarkable in appearance. But when this teacher spoke, something in the man who served tea recognized, with the immediate recognition that bypasses the reasoning mind and lands directly in the body, that he was hearing something true. The teacher spoke of patience. Not the patience of resignation, not the patience of the person who has simply given up hoping for change, but a different kind. An active patience. A patience that is itself a form of engagement. Patience that says, I am here. I will continue to be here. I will continue to offer what I have to offer, not because I am certain it will work, but because it is what I choose to be. Epictetus had said, "Seek not for events to happen as you wish, but wish for events to happen as they do, and you will have tranquility." The teacher framed it differently, but the bones were the same. What if instead of meeting his coldness with your own hardness, you tried something different? What if you offered him kindness? Not because he deserves it, because you deserve to be free of the anger you carry. That last sentence. Because you deserve to be free of the anger you carry. The man sat with that for a long time. He thought of the anger. He had carried it for years. A familiar weight so constant he had almost forgotten it was separate from him, had almost come to believe it was part of his nature rather than something attached to it. The anger at the chief officer, yes. But also the anger before that, the anger at circumstances, at injustice, at the accumulated weight of everything that should have been different and was not. He decided to try, not because he believed it would work in the sense of changing the officer, but because, in some deep place he could not yet fully articulate, something told him that the trying was itself the point. The next morning he prepared the tea with unusual care. This was itself an act of philosophy. The Japanese tea ceremony, Chado, the way of tea, is not about tea. It is about attention. It is about the cultivation of presence so total that even the most ordinary act becomes an act of beauty. Every movement precise, every gesture intentional, the water at exactly the right temperature, the cup oriented correctly, the silence held with the same care as the action. The man who served tea may not have known about Chado, but he practiced it. He brought the tea to the officer's desk. He set it down with care. He met the officer's eyes, or tried to, since the officer did not look up, and he said, "I hope you enjoy your tea, sir." Nothing. The officer did not look up. The words fell into silence and lay there, unacknowledged, apparently without effect. He went back to his work. The next day, the same. The day after, the same. A week of days, the same. The Sufi masters spoke of the practice of sabr. Patience that is not passive endurance but active trust. The trust that the seed planted in the right ground at the right time will grow, even when you cannot see it growing. Even when the surface of the earth shows nothing. Even when you have been watching the earth for weeks and seen no movement. The roots are moving. The work is happening underground. The eye cannot see it. The soul knows it. Marcus Aurelius. Confine yourself to the present. Not trust that tomorrow will bring results. Not build your peace on the expectation of change. Simply confine yourself to the present. This morning's tea, offered with this morning's care. That is the whole task. That is the complete practice. The man continued. Weeks became months, and something was changing, not in the officer, at least not visibly, not yet, but in the man himself. The anger that had been his constant companion was growing quieter. Not gone, not transformed into something beautiful, but quieter. The daily practice of offering kindness, even unreturned kindness, even kindness that fell into a void and made no audible sound, was working on him like water on stone. Slowly, invisibly, undeniably, he began to see the officer differently. This is the gift that patience gives that force never can. Force maintains its object at a distance. The enemy, the obstacle, the thing to be defeated. Patience draws it closer. Patience looks at it for long enough to begin to see it clearly. And clear seeing, as the Sufi poets knew, as Socrates knew, as the Buddha knew, always moves toward compassion. What had made this man so hard? What years of what history had constructed this particular wall? What cold had required the building of such thick insulation? What pain lived at the center of that stone? The man who served tea did not know the answers, but he was asking the questions. And in asking the questions, he was already more free. Dogen wrote, "Do not think you will necessarily be aware of your own enlightenment. Change does not always announce itself. The shift in perception that transforms a prison into a monastery, an adversary into a teacher, a stone into something containing warmth. This shift does not come with bells and banners. It comes quietly, like dawn. And then one morning, a morning like any other, except that it was not, because every morning is exactly itself and cannot be exactly like any other morning, the officer looked up. The man had brought the tea with his usual care. He had added a small treat, something he thought the officer might enjoy. He had set everything down with the full attention of his practice. He had spoken his daily words of care. And the officer looked up. Their eyes met, and from the officer's lips came a sound, small, rough, almost inaudible, the sound of a voice that has not been used for this purpose in a very long time, the sound of two syllables that carry, in every language that has ever existed, an acknowledgement that one human being sees another. Thank you. 2 words. Seneca wrote, Omnia aliena sunt, tempus tantum nostrum est. Everything is alien to us, only time is truly ours. The man who served tea had spent his time not in rage, not in despair, not in the exhausting work of resistance, but in the daily practice of what he had chosen to be. And time, given to this practice, had produced something that force could never have produced. Not a friend, necessarily, not an ally, not even warmth exactly, but recognition, the acknowledgement that a human being had been seen by another human being across a distance that had seemed, for a long time, uncrossable. This is available to each of us, not always in such dramatic form, not always with such clear before and after, but in the small daily choices of how we meet the people who test our patience, in the decision to prepare the tea with care even when we expect no thanks. The practice is the same. We choose who we are, not once, daily, and daily the choice accumulates into something larger, into a self that is steadier, more patient, more at peace, not because the world has become easier, but because we have become less opposed to it. Section 6. Setting down the cup, the wisdom of rest. Imagine a cup of water. You are holding it, your arm extended, the cup light in your hand, just a few ounces, barely worth mentioning. Someone asks you how heavy it is and you laugh a little. Nothing, you say. It's nothing. Now hold it for an hour. Now hold it for a day. Lao Tzu wrote, knowing when to stop, you avoid danger. This is usually read as counsel about ambition, about the pursuit of wealth or power. But it applies equally to something more intimate. Knowing when to stop carrying. Knowing when the cup has been held long enough and must be set down, not because the cup is unimportant, but because the arm cannot hold it indefinitely. There is a Stoic concept that is often overlooked in favor of the more dramatic Stoic virtues of courage and justice. It is the concept of metriopathia, the moderation of passions, the finding of a middle way between the extremes. Not the elimination of feeling, as is sometimes misunderstood, but the proper calibration of engagement. The recognition that intensity sustained without rest consumes the instrument. A bow kept always at full draw loses its tension. A fire, given no room to breathe, suffocates its own flame. A life kept always at full intensity runs dry. The Islamic tradition offers the concept of tawakkul, often translated as trust in God, or surrender to the divine will. But at its practical level, it means something available to everyone regardless of theological conviction. The releasing of the grip, the willingness to say, I have done what I can do. I cannot do everything. I will do my part and trust the rest to the process. This is not laziness. It is not irresponsibility. It is the deep intelligence that knows the difference between what depends on our effort and what does not, and refuses to exhaust itself on the second category while neglecting the first. Aristotle placed great emphasis on what he called theoria, contemplation, reflection, the activity of the soul that is not directed at any external goal but finds its value in itself. He considered this the highest human activity, not because practical life did not matter, but because without the space of contemplation, practical life loses its direction, its depth, its capacity to be genuinely good. We have lost theoria. We have replaced it with productivity. We have filled every available moment with doing, and we wonder why we feel hollow. Seneca, who understood the pressures of public life better than almost anyone, he was advisor to an emperor, for a time one of the most powerful men in Rome, wrote with a kind of anguished honesty about what he called recollectio sui, the gathering of oneself, the need, the urgent and non-negotiable need to step back from the noise and return to the self. Dum differtur vita transcurrit. While we are postponing, life passes. Not while we are resting. While we are postponing the life we actually want, the presence we actually want to bring, the person we actually want to be. All of this is postponed while we run and run and run. The wabi-sabi tradition finds beauty in the weathered, the worn, the marked by use and time. A piece of pottery that has been used, that bears the marks of many hands, many seasons, many meals, is more beautiful in this tradition than a piece that has never been touched. The beauty of use is real, but this tradition also honors the rest between uses. The object on the shelf, waiting, gathering itself, simply being. We are allowed to be on the shelf sometimes. There is a story of a parent and a child. The parent is exhausted, the particular exhaustion of someone who has been giving for a long time from a vessel that has not been refilled. The exhaustion that makes everything feel heavier than it is, that makes patience seem like something that belongs to people with easier lives, that makes the simplest request from a loved one feel, in certain moments, like the last weight added to an already impossible load. The parent had been attending, when possible, a weekly gathering, a period of silence and reflection in the community. It was nothing dramatic, just an hour of stillness, just a small space carved out of the relentless motion of the week. On a particularly difficult evening, the parent announced that this week, there would be no gathering. Too much to do, too tired. The family needed them. The child, who was young, and saw clearly in the way that the young sometimes do before the world teaches them to look away from what is obvious, looked up with what the parent later described as a combination of concern and urgency. "But you must go," the child said. The parent, touched but firm. "I am too tired, little one." "No," the child said. "You must go." "Why?" the parent asked. And the child, without hesitation, with the simple directness of someone who has not yet learned to soften obvious truths to protect others' comfort, said, "Because you are much nicer when you come back." Aristotle would have recognized this. The parent who returned from the gathering was closer to their telos, their purpose, their best self, than the parent who stayed home and tried to give from an empty vessel. The child was not asking for something selfish. The child was asking for the parent's eudaimonia, and for the families which depended on it. Marcus Aurelius, who was emperor, who had every right to say that he had no time for rest, no space for quiet, no luxury of withdrawal from the relentless demand of governing an empire, wrote to himself in the Meditations again and again about the practice of retreating inward. Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. He took the retreat not by going away but by going in. A few moments of genuine presence to the self. A breath of the inner silence, taken wherever he was. This is available to all of us. Not hours, minutes, not a retreat center. A breath. The cup set down for just long enough. The Tao Te Ching says, "Do you have the patience to wait until your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself?" There is a waiting that is not passivity. There is a stillness that is not emptiness but fullness. The cup set down fills itself. The bow unstrung regains its tension. The self-given space recovers its capacity for all the things it wants to give. You cannot pour from an empty cup, but the cup refills if you let it. Tonight, as you approach sleep, which is the great setting down, the nightly dissolution of the self into the replenishing dark, you are allowed to practice this. You are allowed to unclasp your hands from all the things you have been carrying, to let the responsibilities return to wherever responsibilities live when they are not being actively worried about, to let the concerns of tomorrow remain in tomorrow, where they belong. This is not irresponsibility. This is the fundamental wisdom of every tradition that has ever looked carefully at what human beings need to flourish. Rest is not the opposite of life. It is life's foundation. Set down the cup. Section 7. Words that can heal, the craft of sacred speech. The Buddha included right speech in his eightfold path, not as an afterthought, not as the lesser cousin of right action or right understanding, but as a full and equal member of the path to liberation. Right speech. The question is, what makes speech right? What is the quality that separates words that heal from words that wound, even when the content of both might be similar? What is the difference between truth that frees and truth that destroys? Socrates, who taught entirely through conversation, who left nothing written, who communicated only through the living exchange of question and answer in the streets and gymnasiums of Athens, demonstrated a quality of speech that his contemporaries found both magnetic and maddening. He asked questions. He did not assert. He did not lecture. He created space through genuinely not knowing, through genuine curiosity, in which the other person could find their own truth. This is a model of speech that is almost impossibly rare. The speech that is more interested in the other person's discovery than in the speaker's own cleverness. The question asked not to lead somewhere predetermined, but to genuinely explore. The Tao Te Ching offers this: he who knows does not speak. He who speaks does not know. This is not a counsel of silence. Obviously, Lao Tzu wrote a book. It is a counsel of a particular quality of speech. Speech that comes from stillness rather than from noise, from depth rather than from surface, from the place in the human being that actually knows something rather than the place that wants to be seen knowing something. Seneca wrote to Lucilius, Ida effacemi lucili, vindicati tibi. Claim yourself for yourself, he said. But he also wrote, Nusquam est ca ubique est. One who is everywhere is nowhere. The person who speaks from every impulse, who expresses every thought, who mistakes volubility for sincerity, this person is nowhere. The words have no weight because there is no stillness beneath them. Now, the art of offering difficult truths, because sometimes the most loving thing we can do for someone is to tell them something they would prefer not to hear. And the most damaging thing we can do, sometimes, is to withhold that truth because we are uncomfortable with the discomfort it would create. The craft is in the wrapping. A truth delivered in cruelty is not generous. It is cruelty wearing virtue's clothes. The person who says, I'm just being honest as preface to something devastating has confused the value of honesty with the license to harm. But a truth softened into meaninglessness is not kind. It is cowardice wearing kindness's clothes. The middle way, always the middle way, the Sirat al-Mustaqim of the Islamic tradition, the Via Media of the Stoics, the middle way of the Buddha, is truth wrapped in genuine care. Truth offered at the right time, in the right tone, from the right motivation to the right person in the right amount. This sounds complicated. It is. It requires the kind of attentiveness that the ancient traditions called phronesis, Aristotle's practical wisdom, the capacity to perceive what a situation requires and to act accordingly. Not a rule that can be applied mechanically. A quality of perception that is developed through practice and reflection and the accumulated learning of many situations navigated well and poorly and learned from in both cases. But there are practical guides. The Stoic asks, is this mine to say? Meaning, does this truth need to come from me in this moment to this person? Or am I choosing to speak because speaking makes me feel better or powerful or right? The Buddhist asks, is this true, kind, and necessary? All three. Not just true, not just kind, not just necessary. All three working together. And there is a shape that many wise teachers across many traditions have independently discovered for offering difficult feedback. Begin with what is genuinely good, not as a technique, not as a manipulation, as a sincere act of seeing. Before you approach the difficulty, locate and name the genuine value in this person, in their efforts, in their intentions. Let them feel seen in their wholeness before they are asked to examine a part. Then offer the truth, clearly, kindly, without so much softening that the meaning becomes unclear, without so much harshness that the listener shuts down. From the place of genuine care for this person's growth, not from the place of your own need to be right. Then return to appreciation. Let the last thing they taste be the sweetness of being valued, not the bitterness of being corrected. This is not soft. It is not weak. It requires more courage and more skill than either honest brutality or false kindness. It requires you to genuinely see the person, not just their flaw, not just what needs to change, but the whole human being who contains both the flaw and the light. Plato's Socrates practiced this in his way. He infuriated people, yes, he was finally executed for it, but the irritation he provoked was the irritation of being genuinely seen and found, in some respects, wanting. He loved the people he questioned. His questions came from love, and his interlocutors, even the ones who left angry, often returned. Because the experience of being truly seen, even uncomfortably, even in one's incompleteness, is one the soul recognizes as valuable. There is a Zen story, told in various forms in various traditions, of a master who was once harshly criticized by a visitor. The visitor spoke at length, covering the master's many failures with an evident satisfaction. The students who were present expected the master to respond with either anger or impressive equanimity. Instead, the master listened with complete attention until the visitor finished. There was a long silence. Then the master bowed slightly and said, "Thank you. I will reflect on what you have offered." Later, a student asked how the master could receive such an attack with such grace. The master said, "If someone offers you a gift and you do not accept it, with whom does the gift remain?" The student understood, with the one who offered it. "Just so," said the master, "when someone offers harsh words, I choose whether to accept them. I take what truth they contain and learn from it. What is not truth I leave with the one who offered it. It is not mine." This is a radical freedom. The freedom to choose in every moment what we take into ourselves and what we release. To remain open without being defenseless. To receive what is valuable without being destroyed by what is not. Marcus Aurelius. If someone can show me that I am wrong in thought or action, I will gladly change. What I seek is truth, which never harmed anyone. Truth, never harmful. Only the delivery can harm. The truth itself, received by a heart that is open, is always medicine. As you rest tonight, consider, is there something true that you have been withholding from someone you care about out of discomfort? And consider too, is there something someone has tried to offer you, wrapped perhaps in clumsy or even harsh delivery, that contained a truth you have not yet allowed yourself to receive? Both questions are worth sitting with. Both lead, in their different ways, to greater freedom. Section 8. The Friend Within. Making peace with the one you cannot leave. Of all the difficult people in your life, there is one you have perhaps been unkind to more consistently than any other. You know who this is. You speak to this person in ways you would never speak to anyone else. You hold this person to standards that would exhaust anyone. You notice every mistake this person makes and catalog it with a thoroughness that no objective outside observer would endorse. You compare this person unfavorably to other people, to imagined better versions of themselves, to who they could be or should be or would be if they were somehow less flawed than they are. And yet, you cannot leave this person. Wherever you go, they are there. Whatever you achieve, they find the flaw in it. Whatever peace you find, they remind you of the peace you have not yet found. This person is you. Socrates said, "Know thyself." The oracle at Delphi offered the same counsel. Every tradition of wisdom that has ever existed has said, in some form, the most important relationship you will ever have is the relationship you have with yourself. Not because you are the center of the universe. Not because your inner life is more important than your actions in the world. But because everything you do, everywhere you go, everyone you meet, you bring yourself along. You cannot leave yourself at home. You cannot take a vacation from your own inner weather. And so the quality of your relationship with yourself colors everything else. The Sufi tradition speaks of the nafs, the ego, the self, the constructed identity. There are levels to the nafs, a whole psychology embedded in this single concept. At the lowest level, the nafs is amara, commanding, compulsive, driven by base impulses, making choices that harm the person even as they seem to offer satisfaction. At a higher level, the nafs is lawama, self-reproaching, aware of its own failings, caught in a cycle of self-criticism. Higher still, the nafs is mutmainna, the tranquil soul at peace with itself and with reality. The movement from the second level to the third, from self-reproach to tranquility, is not accomplished by ending self-examination. It is accomplished by changing its quality, moving from harsh judgment to compassionate curiosity, moving from what is wrong with me to what is this trying to show me. Aristotle described the virtuous person as someone who not only acts well but enjoys acting well, for whom good action is not a painful struggle against worse impulses but an expression of a developed character that genuinely finds satisfaction in virtue. This is not achieved by will alone. It is achieved by the gradual, patient cultivation of habits that eventually become second nature. This applies to self-relationship. The person who is genuinely at peace with themselves is not someone who has no flaws. They are someone who has learned to hold their flaws with a certain lightness, with curiosity and humor and the recognition that incompleteness is not the same as worthlessness. The wabi-sabi tradition is worth returning to here because it offers something that neither Stoicism nor Buddhism quite articulates in the same way. Wabi-sabi says, "The crack in the bowl is beautiful, not despite being a crack. As a crack, the incompleteness is the beauty, the evidence of history, of use, of the passage of time. This is what makes the object genuinely itself rather than a factory ideal." What if you were wabi-sabi? What if your incompleteness was not a problem to be solved but a quality to be honored? What if the cracks in you, the places where you have broken and been imperfectly repaired, the places where you are rough and unfinished, what if these were, in the deepest sense, where your beauty lives? Aristotle also said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit. But before excellence can be a habit, it must be approached without the crushing weight of self-condemnation. The person who hates themselves for every failure does not approach the next attempt with fresh energy. They approach it already diminished. The shamanic traditions, which understood the human being as a creature of energy as much as matter, spoke of the importance of what we might now call psychological hygiene, the practice of releasing what does not serve. The shaman would work to remove the accumulated spiritual weight of self-condemnation, of unresolved grief, of the ways we have made ourselves small through years of believing the harsh inner voice. The inner voice, the one that tells you that you are not enough, that you should be further along, that others have figured out what you have not, that your particular combination of gifts and flaws is less acceptable than you hoped. This voice is not a truth teller. It is a habit, a learned pattern, usually learned very young, from people who were themselves suffering. Epictetus: "Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things." The opinion we have of ourselves is perhaps the most consequential opinion we hold. And it is, like all opinions, subject to examination and revision. There is a monk in a small dwelling. He has lived alone for many years, in the way that monks sometimes do, in simplicity and silence and the long practice of inner attention. People ask him, "Don't you get lonely?" He says, "I am never lonely. There is always someone with me." They look around. The dwelling is empty. "Who is with you?" "Myself," he says, "and I have found that I am rather good company." This is not arrogance. He does not claim to be more interesting or more accomplished or more virtuous than others. He simply reports a fact. He has learned to enjoy his own company. He has made the inward journey, faced what he found there with honesty and compassion, and arrived at a kind of peace with what he is. This peace, the Buddha called it upekkha, equanimity, is not the peace of someone who has resolved all their problems. It is the peace of someone who has changed their relationship to their problems, who has ceased to require that the problems be solved before peace becomes possible. The Platonic tradition would call this the turning of the soul toward the good, not the acquisition of goodness from outside, but the recognition of the goodness already present within, that has been there all along, covered over by the accumulated weight of our own rejection of ourselves. The Islamic tradition speaks of istiqamah, the state of being upright, consistent, genuine. Not perfect, genuine. The soul that does not pretend to be other than it is, that moves through the world without the exhausting work of self-concealment. May you be happy. May you be at peace. May you be free from suffering. May you live with ease. These words are the beginning of a practice, the loving-kindness practice that the Buddha taught, and they are meant first for yourself. Not after you have earned them, not when you have finally fixed everything that is broken. Now, for the self that exists in this moment, with all its incompleteness, all its rough places, all its wabi-sabi beauty, you are allowed to be kind to yourself, not as an indulgence, as a foundation. The water that nourishes others must first be water. The light that illuminates others must first be light. The kindness you offer the world must come from somewhere, comes from you, and it is replenished by the kindness you allow yourself to receive. Start there. Start here. Start now. May I be happy. May I be at peace. May I be free from suffering. May I live with ease. Section 9. The Donkey, the Well, and the Rising Soul. Let me tell you an old story, as old as human difficulty and as universal as the response to it. In the Persian fable tradition, that great river of wisdom stories that flows from pre-Islamic Iran through the Shahnameh and the parables of Sa'di and the tales of 1001 Nights, there is a recurring figure, the ordinary creature in an extraordinary situation, the unexpected wisdom arising from unexpected places. The donkey is one of these figures, patient, sturdy, sometimes mistaken for slow when it is actually careful. The donkey does not rush because the donkey knows something about the nature of the ground. On a particular day, in a particular countryside, a donkey fell into a well. The well was old and had been forgotten, the kind of thing that happens at the edges of maintained land, where the civilized gives way to the wild and old dangers are lost in new growth. The donkey, moving through a familiar landscape that had quietly changed, found the earth give way beneath its feet. The fall was frightening, but the donkey survived. And then the waiting. The Stoics had a word for what the donkey did not have, but needed: apatheia. Not apathy in the modern sense, not indifference, not caring, but the particular freedom from reactive emotion that allows clear perception. The ability to observe a situation without being swept away by it. To be in the well without the well being in you. Marcus Aurelius practiced apatheia not by suppressing his responses, but by training himself to pause between stimulus and response. To let the first wave of reaction pass before choosing an action. The donkey, in its way, did this too. For a while, perhaps a long while, it simply stood in the dark and waited. And then someone came. Someone who did not know the donkey was there. The farmer, well-intentioned and unaware, began to shovel dirt into the well. Here is where the story becomes a philosophy lesson. The dirt fell, and the donkey had a choice. Not the choice to prevent the dirt from falling. That was not in the donkey's control. Not the choice to make the farmer stop. That was not in the donkey's control either. The donkey's control extended precisely as far as Epictetus said it always extends, to its own response. The dirt fell on the donkey's back. The donkey could let it pile up, could let the weight accumulate, could stand in the well becoming more and more buried under the accumulated weight of what was being thrown at it. Or, and this is the moment of genius, the moment that makes this story worth carrying through generations, or the donkey could shake it off. Shrug. The dirt falls. Step up onto the dirt. Repeat. This is Stoic endurance made physical. This is the Taoist response to what cannot be changed. Not the fighting of the current, but the use of the current. The dirt meant to bury becomes the ground to stand on. The weight meant to press down becomes the platform to rise. The shamanic traditions of Central Asia and Siberia, from which much of the spiritual vocabulary of the steppes and Anatolia eventually arose, spoke of the human soul as something that can journey even in terrible conditions. The shaman could descend into the underworld and return, not unaffected, not unchanged, but not destroyed. The descent was part of the path. The underworld was a place of learning, not only of danger. The donkey was in its own underworld, dark, enclosed, the sky not visible, the surface unreachable. And what happened there in that darkness was a kind of initiation. Shake it off. Step up. The Japanese concept of gamen, enduring the seemingly unbearable with patience and dignity, is not about suppressing the experience of difficulty. It is about not allowing the difficulty to diminish the essential quality of the person. The donkey did not pretend the dirt was not falling. The donkey did not pretend the situation was comfortable. The donkey simply refused to be defeated by it. Shake it off. Step up. Throughout our lives, people will throw dirt on us. This is a fact, not a comfortable fact, not one we would have chosen if we had designed the world, but a fact nonetheless, as consistent as gravity and as universal as the human tendency toward both cruelty and kindness existing in the same hearts. People will say things that diminish us. Circumstances will press down with weights that seem designed to keep us small. The institutions and structures and sometimes the random events of a life lived in the world, all of these will, at various times, throw dirt. We have a choice about what we do with it. The Persian poet Sa'di wrote in the Gulistan, the Rose Garden, that collection of prose and poetry and fables that has been read for 8 centuries, about the quality of the person who rises, not who avoids falling, who rises after falling, Sadi's moral universe is populated not with the untouched and the perfect but with the fallen and the risen, the lost and the found, the person who went down into the darkness and came back with something they could not have found on the surface. The farmer, shoveling steadily, was unaware of the transformation happening below. This is important. The people who throw dirt at us are often not malicious. Often they are simply doing what they are doing in the way they do it without full awareness of the effect on us. This does not excuse carelessness or cruelty when it is deliberate, but it does complicate the narrative of pure victimhood. The farmer was not an enemy. The farmer was a farmer doing a farmer's work. And the donkey, rising on the accumulated dirt, eventually stepped out onto the sunlit ground, covered in dust, changed by the experience, undeniably alive. There is a related story, one that has traveled across many cultures, told in many forms, about a farmer, a horse, and the mysterious nature of what is fortunate. The horse ran away. The neighbors said, "What terrible luck." The farmer said, "Perhaps." The horse returned with 2 wild companions. The neighbors said, "What wonderful luck." The farmer said, "Perhaps." The son, training the new horses, broke his leg. The neighbors said, "Terrible." The farmer said, "Perhaps." The army came and took all the young men to war, except the son with his broken leg. The neighbors, finally beginning to understand, said, "We shall see." This story is Persian in spirit, if not in origin. It belongs to the Taoist tradition of Zhuangzi, who told versions of it to illustrate the opacity of fortune. But it belongs equally to the Stoic tradition, the recognition that our judgments about events are often premature, that what seems like disaster may contain the seed of rescue, that what seems like blessing may contain the seed of difficulty. Perhaps, we shall see. The equanimity in this phrase is not detachment. The farmer loves his son. The farmer cares about the horse. The farmer is not indifferent to what happens. The equanimity is in the refusal to finalize the meaning of events before they have finished unfolding. Marcus Aurelius. Everything harmonizes with me, which is harmonious to thee, O universe. Nothing for me is too early nor too late, which is in due time for thee. The universe has its seasons, its rhythms, its ways of unfolding that exceed our ability to predict or comprehend. The Stoic practice is not to stop caring but to hold our caring lightly, to engage fully with what is given without insisting on a predetermined outcome. Dogen Zenji wrote, "Life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes by and opportunity is lost. Each of us should strive to awaken. Awaken. Do not waste this life. The urgency here is real. The life is real. But the waking that Dogen points toward is not the waking of frantic effort. It is the waking of clear seeing, seeing what is actually here, what is actually being offered, what is actually available in this moment that is not available in any other moment. Shake it off. Step up. See clearly. Hold lightly. Move forward without insisting on a predetermined direction. These are not different teachings. They are facets of the same stone. The donkey that steps out of the well onto sunlit ground is not the same donkey that fell in. Something has changed. The descent happened. The dirt happened. The darkness happened. And through all of it, the donkey made choices that moved it upward rather than downward, that transformed what fell as burial into what served as ground. This is the pattern of the human life lived well. Not a life without descent. Not a life without darkness and difficulty and the falling of dirt. A life in which the descent becomes initiation. In which the darkness becomes the place of learning. In which the dirt becomes the platform. And each time we rise, each time we choose to shake it off and step up rather than stand still and be buried, we rise slightly higher than we were before. Section 10. The river carries you home. A closing. We have walked a long road together tonight. We have stood at the threshold of a great throne room and watched what happens when welcome replaces hostility. We have sat in a mountain monastery and learned from the teacher we did not choose. We have looked into the hearts of difficult people and found, beneath the surface of their difficulty, the luminous and wounded core that we share with them. We have served tea to stone walls for months and discovered that the practice changed us more than it changed the wall. We have set down the cup and felt the sweetness of rest. We have wrapped difficult truths in genuine care. We have turned the gaze inward and found there not an enemy but a companion. Flawed, worthy, fundamentally enough. And we have risen from the well on the dirt that was thrown at us, stepping out into the light. This is a lot. It is also, in another sense, nothing at all. Because none of it requires new abilities or special gifts. None of it requires a different kind of person than you already are. What it requires is simply a different kind of attention. A turning of the mirror, a softening of the grip. Lao Tzu, in the closing pages of the Tao Te Ching, says something that has been translated 1,000 ways but always means the same thing. The sage does not contend, and therefore no one can contend with him. Not weakness, the cessation of unnecessary struggle. The recognition that most of what we fight does not need to be fought. That most of what we carry can be set down. That most of what we fear will dissolve under the light of clear seeing. The Sufi image that feels most right for this closing moment is not the palace or the desert or the fire. It is the river. You are the river. You have always been the river. The water that you are has been flowing since before you knew yourself. It has moved through landscapes of joy and landscapes of grief, through the smooth, wide places and the narrow, rocky places, through the deep pools of contemplation and the fast, shallow places of action. Sometimes the river moves loudly. Sometimes it moves in near silence. But it always moves, and it always moves toward the sea. You do not have to figure out how to reach the sea. The river knows. The water knows what it is flowing in and toward and through. The river knows even when the individual drop of water is confused about where it is. This is tawakkul. This is wu wei. This is the fana of the Sufis. This is the equanimity of the Stoics. This is the shikantaza of Dogen, just sitting, just the movement that is already happening, held in attention with love. You are not required to understand everything. You are not required to have resolved everything. You are not required to have become everything you hope to become before you can rest. The river rests in its moving. The flame rests in its burning. The star rests in its shining. You can rest in being what you are. Marcus Aurelius wrote, near the end of the Meditations, "Perfection of character is this, to live each day as if it were your last, without frenzy, without apathy, without pretense. Each day as if it were your last. Not in urgency, in presence, in the full flavor of this day, this hour, this breath, this moment of being alive in a world that is, even in its difficulty, astonishing." The Buddha spoke of the middle path, not the path of extreme indulgence, not the path of extreme austerity, but the path of the properly tuned instrument. The string that is too tight breaks. The string that is too loose makes no music. The string tuned to its right tension sings. You are that instrument. Your life is tuning you, day by day, difficulty by difficulty, rest by rest, practice by practice. And the music you are making, however imperfect, however incomplete, however marked by the inevitable cracks of a life fully lived, that music is yours, entirely and irreplaceably yours. And it is needed. In the composition that is the world, your note, your particular note in your particular voice at your particular pitch, cannot be supplied by anyone else. The shamanic traditions understood the human being as a bridge between the earth and the sky, between the visible and the invisible, between the past of the ancestors and the future of the children. To walk as a human being in the world is already a sacred act. The bridge need not be perfect. It need only hold. You hold. You have held through everything that has come to you. You are here, still moving, still breathing, still capable of listening to words about the nature of patience and welcome and rest and the art of rising. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole thing. Aristotle's eudaimonia, human flourishing, the full expression of what a human being can be, is not a destination. It is not a state to be achieved and then maintained. It is what happens when the river flows, when the instrument is tuned, when the mirror is clean enough to reflect the light that is always there. It is what is happening right now, in the willingness to be present to these teachings, in the willingness to soften, to let go, to consider that perhaps the difficult people in your life are teachers, that the dirt being thrown at you might become the ground you stand on, that the crack in the bowl might be the most beautiful part, that the friend you have been seeking might be the one who has been with you all along. Perhaps, we shall see. Rumi, in one of his most famous poems, the reed flute poem that opens the Masnavi, begins with the image of separation. The reed cut from the reed bed, crying from the wound of its cutting. And he says, "Listen to the reed and the tale it tells, how it sings of separation. But the reed's cry, the song of its separation, is also the music that heals. The wound and the healing are not separate. The cut and the singing are the same event, seen from different angles. You are the reed. Your wounds are not separate from your music. Your cracks are not separate from your light. Your incompleteness is not separate from your beauty." Wabi-sabi, the cracked bowl repaired with gold. Kintsugi, the break made beautiful. This is what we are. This is what we have always been. And now, as the last of the night's great teachings settle into the soil of your heart, not to be remembered necessarily, not to be carried forward as a list of duties, but to do their quiet work in the deep places where the roots are, now it is time to rest. You do not have to earn this rest. You do not have to deserve it. You do not have to have understood everything or remembered everything or become anything different than what you are. You are already the river, already the reed, already the cracked bowl with the gold repair, already the mirror, perhaps a little dusty, but fundamentally intact, fundamentally luminous, fundamentally capable of reflecting the light that is always there. May you be happy. May you be at peace. May you be free from suffering. May you live with ease. May your sleep tonight be deep and good. May your rest be real. May your dreams carry you to the places your waking mind cannot yet reach. And when you return from sleep to the waking world, to all its complexity, all its difficulty, all its unexpected beauty, may you carry with you a little more patience, a little more kindness, a little more of the deep knowing that you were always, in some essential way, already home. The river is moving. The flame is burning. The reed is singing. And the light, always, beneath everything, in everything as everything, the light is here,